most commonly, most of us call this day Palm Sunday. But if we look at the church's designation of this day more carefully, we see that it is really called the Sunday of the Lord's Passion. And then in parenthesis, it's usually said also known as Palm Sunday. Why do we call it Palm Sunday? Usually we call it Palm Sunday, George, if I may, because of these. It's what we get. We get to take them home. It's something we can hold in our hands and touch and feel. So it's a reminder of the day. So it's what is most on our minds. The palms. The beautiful ceremony that we began our liturgy with over in the Lady Chapel. And the procession. And that wonderfully triumphant hymn that we sang together. But, if you notice, shortly, very shortly after that hymn concluded, even as we heard the collect of the day, the tone of the day dramatically shifts. It shifts our focus, our mind, to the passion, the suffering, and the death of Jesus. In fact, the first lesson of the day is that prophecy from Isaiah of what is called in most, if you look at the titles that are inserted in most Bibles, it's the suffering servant, the song of the suffering servant. And then our mind's eye is cast upon that lovely hymn from Paul's letter to the Philippians, about where he describes the great humility of Jesus. And then, of course, we slide directly into the narrative, the story that we just heard and participated in, the passion and death of Christ. This liturgy actually is on this Sunday, in part because it's sort of the movie trailer for what's about to occur. You see, this is the beginning of Holy Week. And if you would take the liturgies of the church all week, beginning today, and if you looked at the liturgies as they were lined up in the church, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and into Saturday, you would see a longer narrative, a longer story. But what we did today, we took all of that and we compressed it into a shortened version, sort of like a movie trailer. You get a flavor, a sense of what the big story is all about. It's supposed to, in a sense, whet your appetite for what's coming. What's coming. And so, what I'd like to do today for you is to reflect a bit on what all is compacted into this hour and a half long liturgy. 6 days of reflection, 6 days of thinking, 6 days of praying and worshiping, all compacted into this little hour and a half that we're together. And we can do that really by looking perhaps at an even shorter bit of time, and that is in that second lesson, that lovely hymn from Paul's letter to the Philippians. It's brief, several verses from the second chapter. It's so pretty. Jesus did not deem equality with God something to be exploited. I really don't like the translation. There's an older translation that I grew up with that I really, really like. It says, Jesus did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. That's a bit more dramatic. I like that one. Now, most of us today, if you ever look at Facebook or you have any kind of social media thing, you know what a meme is. A meme is one of those little pictures that you see, and it's usually got a little phrase on top of it. And I look around the room, and there are people here who use memes, I'm sure. But a lot of us did not grow up with memes. Most of us grew up with posters. You had posters maybe in a frame, or not even like if you didn't have a frame like me, you had them tacked to your bedroom wall, and your dad would come in and say, "Well, I got another hole in the bedroom wall," that sort of thing. And sometimes they were inspirational posters. And there was one in particular that was quite popular for a long time. It was a rope with a big knot at the end of it, and there was a kitten, usually, at the end of the rope, and he had his claws, and they were really holding on to that knot at the end of the rope. And it usually said something like, "Hang in there, baby." You were just grasping at that knot right at the end of the rope. That's kind of what we're talking about. When we're talking about Jesus holding on to something, grasping at something, St. Paul is saying Jesus did not deem his equality with God something to be grasped at. Think of that little creature holding on to that rope for dear life. There is a phrase we often hear, holding on for dear life, as if we are holding on to the end of that rope and there's nothing on the other end of us except a big chasm, a big canyon. And we can only hold on to that rope for dear life. Well, what St. Paul is saying is Jesus did not think of his equality with the Father as something to be held onto like that. In fact, quite the opposite. Jesus let it go. He let it go. And he found himself in human estate, like you and like me. He was no longer in the Father's presence in the same way. He no longer had the power of the Father. The Word made flesh that St. John tells us was there at the beginning of creation. He no longer had that kind of power. He no longer used that kind of power, but rather he let it all go. And then St. Paul says, not only did he let it all go and become one of us, but his humility was so great that he would empty himself even further, that he would let go of even all of the powers that he had as perhaps the most human of all humans. And he would accept his death, the ultimate letting go. And he would accept it fully. And then St. Paul says, not only that, he would accept death on a cross. Now, there's something about that we don't quite understand, because you see, in the world of Rome, death on a cross was not merely an ugly death, a horrible physical death, because it is a gruesome kind of death. So it's not only a terrible physical experience, but it was also a social gruesome experience, because death on the cross meant you were a total and abject failure, that you were worth nothing. You were the worst of the worst, the lowest of the low. You were to be totally and absolutely rejected. You were to turn away from the person who was crucified. So not only did he accept death, but the worst kind, the worst possible human death known to humans in that time. This is what Jesus accepted. This was the humility of Jesus. Now stop for a moment. And I want you to slide over to another little bit of scripture with me. Slide over to another passage that we hear from Paul in his letter to the Corinthians in the 13th chapter. Most of us hear it, we've heard it a gazillion times, quite frankly. We hear it all the time at weddings. Oh, love. Love is kind. Love is not boastful. Love is this, love is that. It's kind of, it's cute. It's fuzzy. It's warm. It's cuddly. No, it's not. Because the kind of love that St. Paul is talking about uses a word, a very careful word. The word is agape. It's the love that Paul just described in Philippians. It's the love that God has for you and for me by sending His Son into the world. It is the love that Jesus had when He gave His life for us on the cross. It is the love that is utter and total self-giving. It is the love that would go to the cross. It isn't the romantic love that we all associate with that word, and we take that portion of Scripture and we place it within that context. I'm not denigrating it at all when it's used in that context. In fact, if people loved each other in that way, what a marvelous and powerful world it would be. But in point of fact, it is the love that God calls us to, because in yet another portion of Scripture that we will hear again this week, on Thursday, on Maundy Thursday, Jesus looks at His disciples at the Last Supper, and He says to them, I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. And the word He uses is agape. It is the same word. Love as I have loved. Love one another. If we would have the mind of Christ, St. Paul says, we would have the Spirit of Christ, we would be able to do marvelous and great things. Nothing in this world would stop the power of God. Not even death itself. That is the message, the profound message of this Holy Week. And we have compressed it into this little bit of time. But my friends, I am asking you to think about it all week long. To think about the times in our lives, in our time, in our day, in your life, in your day, hour by hour this week, where God is calling us moment by moment to grow into that mind, to grow into that life. For as we began our Lenten journey here at St. Luke's, we said that Christ's call to each and every one of us was simple. Come, follow me. Walk in my steps. Those steps were steps toward this kind of love. They were incremental things, step by step by step. We don't learn to love that way all at once. We learn to do it little by little by little, day by day, moment by moment. But we must learn nonetheless. Let us make these days special days to reflect on that reality. To hear the voice of Jesus call to us yet again. Come, follow me. Even if that path, those steps, lead to a cross, lead to suffering, lead to challenges in life. Because the reality is that if we follow faithfully and surely, these steps lead to glory. They lead to life. Surely, as the time will pass this week, and as we sit here in 7 days, we will stand with one another in the glory of Easter Sunday. We will be here together proclaiming the good news of Christ. For He has already paid the price. But we will share in it in a new way, in a deeper way, in a fuller way. That love will be ours. Come. Follow. Walk. Love. And you will